Hey, it's Joe Solari here, and welcome back to the Business of Writing. Today, I have a special guest, Leo Petracci. How you doing, Leo?
Great to see you, Joe. Doing pretty good. Gorgeous here and happy to be on the show.
Thanks. So you're going to school me on Reddit and how you've used it, and help me to understand how authors can make the most of that platform. I think this originally came out inside my author group. You mentioned something about Reddit, right?
Absolutely. And when within your author group, you brought up superfans and the idea that you have some people that are entirely devoted to you, or they're worth 10 times, 100 times more than your normal fans. And that's a huge benefit that I've gotten out of Reddit. And really, where I mentioned it there is that it allows you to connect with some people like those superfans. It really lets you get that deep connection with them and make them happy and make you happy too.
So why don't you kind of preface everything with like what you write and how you got into this, and then segue into how you ended up using Reddit to grow your business.
Absolutely. So Reddit is actually where I got my start. So there's a subreddit called No Sleep, and it's all about horror. And it's people go on, they write horror stories, they write them as if they've actually happened. If you've heard of creepypastas, works the same way. And I remember, I think 5 years ago, I was in college, and just one night decided to write a horror story. And it was something where I think it got 10 upvotes, which on Reddit is awful. Wrote another one, and it hit the front page, and like, I forget how many it had, but it felt like you were a celebrity overnight. So I mean, obviously that feeling's addictive. So that was a great, feedback loop for me. Mm-hmm. And where that went into is I decided to use it to try to hone my skills. If you look at horror is very much a genre, kind of like romance, where you're trying to elicit a feeling. It's all about how someone feels about something, or how you can describe things to give them that emotional reaction. In horror, it's either fear or it's like a thrill. In romance, it's either a thrill or that love feeling or something along those lines. Mm-hmm. But it's a great denominator going over to something like No Sleep, where you can put things out there, see what works and what doesn't, and find out what people really enjoy and they don't. So that's where I first got interested, learned to hone the skill, and also learned how to really build rapport with fans. You find out what they like. That's your right to market, is when you go out there and determine what type of stories build on them. From there, there's a sub called Writing Prompts, where people go and they just ask you to write stories about stuff. So you talk about somewhere where your fan base is asking for something where, I mean, you don't even have to do market research. You just see a prompt that comes up. Someone says, hey, I want a story about a superhero that makes black holes. Boom, there you go. And you run with it. And you can get insane amounts of traction coming in there. But I mean, I would say it's not quite how it used to be. You're not going to get millions of fans or something like that. But still, you get that ability to make yourself a better writer, to realize what people want to read. And not just that, but what catches them on the quick and the fly. So from there, go ahead. Mm-hmm.
How long are these stories that you'd be writing in this?
Something like No Sleep, I would say 1,500, 2,000 words maybe. Short. So sometimes they're multi-parts. I think my longest one was 7,000, 8,000 words. That was actually the first time I published a Kindle. I remember I got a paycheck for $35 and super excited when that came in the mail. But I mean, they're short. And again, that's where I think you can utilize Reddit if you're a new writer. Find out what works and what doesn't. What makes people click? What gives them that feeling, especially when they're just browsing through a web page and they stumble on something, and by the end of the story they feel compelled enough to comment instead of just flipping on by.
Well, you kind of blew my mind, because I never thought of it as something like you would go and actually put your work up there and get feedback so quickly, because
absolutely,
it's such a great thing as an early writer to, the reality is that if you can't find an audience, you're never going to make money in this business. And to have a way to kind of test the market in such a minimal viable product is fantastic.
I think that's the biggest advantage to it. I mean, when we look at Reddit, it's about how to read your audience, how to get to know them. And again, you're testing out what they love. I mean, how else can you resonate better with your audience than you put up 10 different stories and you see what catches them and what doesn't?
So how did you move from there into, I guess there's kind of two avenues. There's one, I'm interested to hear how you go from there to, being a real author on with real books. Right. I don't mean that in any way, demeaning, but like,
I totally get it.
Kind of traditional independent publishing. And then how there's this whole other piece to that that's about hey, some people upvote your thing, but then how do you turn that into a community, and how do you start to connect with those people and, create your own community, not you just be kind of one of the folks hanging out in another community. Yeah.
So what I think is really important there, what you mentioned, is it's a focus upon community and not cash, not money, not I don't know, there's 100 other metrics. But on Reddit, I would say the community is the biggest part. And that's where you are looking for ways that you can pull people together to what they love. So an example is if you're on the writing prompt subreddit, people are looking for the stories that they really want to read. So you put something on there with a great hook, you pull them in, and it floats up to a higher position on the page. Maybe you have 100 readers that are going in, and then you provide them the rest of the story, let's say, for free. So I would go on, I would write one chapter, and then I'd publish 2 or 3 more, and that would be the whole story, 4 chapters or so. But by the end of that, I mean, people are waiting for you 12 hours to publish the next part, because you publish part 1, you go home after go to work the next day, let's say, come back, 24 hours, they check their phone later. So you bring that habitual behavior where they're checking back. And I think that's huge because it makes them look around, come back, circle, and boomerang to you. So the big part of there where you build that community is where they start to recognize that these stories chapter by chapter are coming from you. It's not something that they binge read at one time, forget about it, never read it again. It's a check-in every day. It's almost like some of those apps where you get a little prize where you come in every day. For me, it's a chapter. I give it to them, and I always give my work, anything that's on Reddit, it's always free. I've never, I don't think, charged something that was on Reddit that wasn't available for free in one way or another. Mm-hmm. So it's that ability that if you're a super fan, if you're following on there, it's accessible to you, and people love that. I mean, you really shows how much you care for them, what you're willing to provide.
Well, and I know some authors that have done kind of similar things within their newsletter where they provided a story chapter by chapter in chunks.
Right.
It doesn't stop them from later on taking that and, bundling it up and selling it as a book, right? Like,
absolutely. And that's the golden part. What I typically do is I'll publish chapter by chapter the entire, let's use an example actually. So Star Child's one of my books. It's a superhero story about, let's say, high school, college age kids. They pick up superpowers. It's your traditional Marvel type, exciting action story. And for this, every single chapter, there's 100 chapters in the first book, is published on Reddit. I give people 2 weeks to read it, and I'm publishing something every 3 or 4 days, and then I'll typically pull it, and that's when I go publish. But if you're a super fan, if you stick around, if you're interested, if you're joining me along the journey, that's where you can get the whole thing free, and you can get it hot off the press. And something like that, I think, is addicting. I mean, they see the raw content, what's coming out directly, and it gives you that great connection with them. And not just that, but you have people in the comments coming in, they're saying, I bet you this is going to happen next. Sometimes they're spot on, sometimes they're completely wrong. And sometimes you just go mess with them and make them think they're on their way, and it's completely off. But that's where you get that user interaction. And again, you give them a place to build. So the way Reddit's structured too is you have what's called subreddits. Think of them almost like folders. So you create your own folder. That's where people come and aggregate around you. And then I typically post to some of the larger subreddits on there, like Writing Prompts or No Sleep. And that's where you can bring in some of your fans to build that community.
Okay. So you found them there, and then you went and said, hey, I'm going to be publishing more over in this subreddit.
Right. And that's something where, again, I mean, a big thing on Reddit is respect. So if you're going to open up a subreddit or something like that, and you are posting on a larger one, you just don't want to take more than you give. So, and that's a huge thing that builds that community too, is that the number one contributor on your subreddit, on the subs that you post on, should be you. You could have a net positive effect of when you go as opposed to when you leave.
So yeah, why don't you talk a little bit about you mentioned etiquette and some of the things that, are do's and don'ts for
for Reddit.
Right. Because I think one of the things that can be dangerous in the author community is it's like, oh, well, if I get to the spot faster, I'm going to be able to capture some audience and that's going to be what propels my career. And then you go in there and you do it horribly wrong and it does the exact opposite. You now have
exactly a backfire.
People that hate you on Reddit.
That's the thing. And that's where I've seen it time and time again, where people come on Reddit and it's really, they try to take more than they give. They have something that's a really poorly described ad or something like that. They're pulling people in, or maybe they have a picture of them with their dog next to them, and the dog's cute, so it gets a whole bunch of upvotes and like, I just published a book here or something. And you get a lot of negative flack, negative traffic. People see through that stuff. And so I'd say the big part of it is you have to be genuine. If you're coming on and you're giving people stories that they can read, you have to give them the story, let them read it, give them the whole freebie. And they enjoy that and they'll stick around. And even, I think some of them have never purchased anything from me, but they're probably worth more dollars as fans than any of my other fans. They tell their friends, they post every time something goes on, they're going on and upvoting. They're in my newsletter, commenting on there. And these are the peoples I see time and time again. Some of them, for 3-4 years now, I see them posting over and over. I found my editor on Reddit. I found my audiobook narrator on Reddit. It's just got this, again, this build-up effect where more and more comes out. But when we talk to etiquette, again, just don't ask more than you give. Don't try to sell people stuff directly right away. Give them the option. I say make everything free. That's my opinion. And then give it a purchase option as well.
Well, and I think the other thing that I've seen, I wouldn't necessarily know about this platform, but one thing I've learned is maybe a particular person that's in your community isn't a reader, but they're an audiobook listener, or they're a huge purchaser on Kickstarter, right? Like
exactly.
You know, that was one thing I found with my list is, you know, I'm selling a book for $3.99. I go on to Kickstarter and run a campaign, and you see somebody comes in and they buy one of your highest level pledges, but then you see their history and they're spending you know, thousands of dollars a month on games, right? Like, so you you never know, like, what you might think, oh, this guy's just getting stuff for free. No, you haven't found what he wants to pay money for.
Right. 100%. And there's so much more outside of the cash too. I mean, there is, you're right. You might offer up a Patreon or something. Patreons are big on Reddit, for instance. People go on and sometimes someone will drop $20 a month to support you, which, I mean, over the course of a year adds up quick. Yeah. So there's something like that, but they might never buy a book. And then there's other people where, like you said, again, I think there's just this whirlwind effect where the more chatter, the more noise you get. Oftentimes the people that read your stuff for free make the most noise. I don't necessarily know why that's correlated. I don't know if it's a way they want to give back or if it's just because they're always there. But those are the people that they're screaming your name from the rooftops. They're letting other people know about your book that do go buy it.
Yeah. Well, and, you know, I think the part that a lot of authors struggle with when we get to this community component and how, you know, we were talking earlier, we got on about cumulative advantage and the book advantage. And that's such an important part is that community piece and how people don't want to just watch a movie. They want to talk about watching a movie.
Exactly.
Right. Even if they hate everything that's happened to Star Wars since the first movie in 1976, most likely they've seen everything and brought their kids to see everything since then, right. But they also want to bitch about it.
I mean, I've got some guy, I forget where he is, I'll have to look, but he writes in the same grammar each time he goes and Amazon reviews me, always 2 stars. Read every one of my books, always 2 stars. So it's similar, you know, maybe they don't really like it, but they're still reading it. I don't know why they are, but, you know, it's still going through.
Well, maybe you find out everybody else gets 1 star. You're 100% better than everybody else.
So that works out too.
Right.
You just never know when you hit, again, I guess I call them a miracle moment. But an example is off of Reddit. And this is, again, when you talk about cumulative advantage, I think that you've got 100 dice out there, and every once in a while the stars line up and you get one of these miracle moments, and every additional fan is rolling these dice in your favor. Yeah. And super fans have better odds, right? And you get something that happens overnight that's a huge leap. An example was when I started off, one of my early books called The Bridge, it's science fiction. Someone, I don't know how it got to Hackaday, but somehow it made its way over to the website Hackaday. They don't even review books. And I woke up one morning to me as a new author with, I think it was like 700 copies sold overnight. I had no idea where these things came from. And all of a sudden I just see them on the front page of this science fiction website. It's not even science fiction. It's just a science website. So, and I think a lot of that came from Reddit, where people maybe not recommended it to them directly, but the Amazon algorithm picked it up. This editor read it, fell in love with it, and made a post. And those are the miracle moments that you get that really start to define those jumps. Another example is Reddit, people post the links. You get a link that goes in the right area because they love you, You can make huge sales overnight simply because they're trying to tell people this stuff's great. You should check it out. You don't get that without a community, and you don't get that without quality content.
Well, that's it. I mean, if you can't write, to that audience where they're excited about it, and that isn't to say it's got to be good. It just has to be what they're looking for, right? Like,
right, correct.
We see some of these fan fiction sites, the stuff that they're writing.
It's troublesome, right? It's a good movie. If you've ever gone on the deep end of Netflix, you know what I mean. People still watch them.
Yeah. That's a good analogy,
right? I mean, some of those movies have more reviews than the big ones, and I think you're right. It's not about I forget. It's not about purple prose. It's not about the best quality content. It's about you put something out there someone enjoys. If you go out in the street and Picasso is painting in one corner and a caricature or person is in another corner, and the caricature is painting your face, if you don't know who Picasso is, you're probably getting your face painted. And it's the same thing. Nowhere near the same level of skill, but it's personal. You like it. It's what you want.
You bring up Picasso, and there's a guy who it wasn't by accident that he became a big deal. Like he actively was working on his career. I mean, he's famously known for Cubism, which was one small part of his career that he collaborated with one other artist. But the point was he was always finding out his network. He was working with other artists. He was helping them. He was competing with them. He was, he was hanging out with authors. He was also working the people that had money, right? Like,
and it's that multifaceted approach, like you said, in Advantage. I mean, it's all about having your fingers in the right pots, touching all the right areas, and eventually they just start rolling. And you get enough of these boulders rolling, creates an avalanche.
Yeah, and that's it. We were talking before. It's that whole thing of you don't know which round it's going to happen in,
right? Or where.
Yeah, I use the analogy in the book of Monopoly, and I was just out in Portland with my family. We play it every summer when we're out there. And my one niece.
Are you still together? I'm surprised. No.
It's ruthless. Kids have gone away from the table crying. It's brutal in our house.
Good, you got to teach them young.
Yeah. And my one niece, she naturally got the orange properties just enrolling. She just had, and it was like my whole family, you just was like, game's over, right? Because we know that at that point, the advantages are so much tilted in her favor.
Right. It's not
those, right? It's just a matter of that cycle going through. Mm-hmm. And lo and behold, I don't know, we played probably another 45 minutes to an hour. Half of us were dead.
And just siphons it out. And like you said, it's like having trick dice. You got weighted dice. Maybe it's not sevens every time, but it's enough times that you win against the house.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's I think a lot of folks in this community, in the author community, they're so focused on the other side, the transaction, they forget about how, spending that time with the community like that, giving to them, how that's a different kind of investment, right? It's not the kind of.
Or sorry, go ahead. Mm-hmm.
Well, opposed to like, in a situation where if you're you really have a passion to be an author, and you don't have a lot of capital,
right?
Like this is a way, like you can iteratively figure that out and test your
approach
product and be building that audience. I think it's fantastic.
And again, I think the key word you use there is iterative. I mean, over and over, you're trying it until you get it right. And you find out it's little tweaks sometimes. Sometimes it's not huge stuff. It's just little details that go the whole way. And sometimes it's things that I know today are big details, like the book cover art. I mean, you always hear, don't judge a book by its cover. I could show you some of my early covers, and I mean, I'm surprised that anyone bought these things. I mean, you learn that and you invest whatever it takes to make a good cover. And it just pulls back so many times over. But that's an example where the writing was good. I had the fan base. I couldn't figure out why these things were flopping on Amazon. You turn that switch and boom, huge difference.
Yeah. Yeah. Where it's like, probably on Reddit, you don't necessarily need a cover.
No, you don't. It'll help you if you do, but you don't need them.
Yeah, but certainly, and now, I mean, some of the authors that we know that they couldn't get away with the covers that got them in this business.
Oh, not at all, right? I mean, you look at I even look at some science fiction covers today pushed by trad, and they would flop so hard in indie. And it's interesting. It's different markets. You got to be aware and realize what's coming up. And I think
Well,
what's
and you
really
look.
important, or go ahead.
I was just going to say, when you look at the level of talent that's come into the space around book covers, I mean, there's some guys that are they're just amazing artists.
Insane. I don't even know what to say sometimes. I mean, you tell someone, hey, what do you want? Well, I'd like something that shows this and this, and you turn around and it's like magic just happened on the page. And it's unfortunate. I love my editor. She is fantastic, especially because I'm not very artistically inclined when it comes to drawing stuff, and I'm colorblind too, so I can't even tell sometimes if it looks fantastic from a color standpoint. When you have someone that really makes it look great, I mean, that is a talent in their own, and they need to be praised and appreciated.
Oh yeah, they sell a lot of books for people.
They do. And one thing really quick before we forget, I want to tie this back, is we mentioned looking at different marketplaces, looking at the difference between community and, let's say, transactional. And I think what's important to remember is what your community exists for. If you look at Reddit doesn't exist to sell stuff, which is why if you go on Reddit trying to sell stuff, you're going to flop, right? You're not, that is a secondary effect that can happen, but that shouldn't be your main drive there. Your drive there is building a community. Your drive there is making people happy, making people love your work, making their day better. Because that's why they go on Reddit, right? They go there to find something that entertains them or that they enjoy. Maybe later on that cash transaction comes to you. Maybe it doesn't. You go to Amazon. Well, you're not going on Amazon really to make people's day better for free or profit free or anything like that happens. It's a storefront. And so it's acceptable to sell stuff there. That's what it exists for. The expectations are completely different. So I think that's where it depends where you come in. When I go to Amazon, I'm definitely transaction focused. When I go to Reddit, it's all about how do I just make my fan base happy.
The thing you made me think about with that, which I think is going to be important in the future, be something for us to talk about and see how this plays out, is you look at Facebook, and their focus is advertising, right? They're selling our attention. That's the business they're in. And that's not going to play. It doesn't seem to me like it's playing out for them too well long term.
No, I don't think so either. I think it was very sexy up front, and we'll see how it goes. I can't predict it,
but I just know from this, this past year, I made a decision. It didn't matter left or right. Anybody that talked about politics, I snoozed them. And it ended up, all I was getting was ads. And
that's what I've noticed too. It's like every post.
Right? And here's the other thing that's interesting about this. I was doing some writing about this. Like, I bought a particular product.
Okay.
And of course they pixeled me when I went to the website, right. And they're not marketing to me anymore. Like, I'm their customer and they're like, okay, they're letting me see how I like the product. But Facebook has that data.
Oh, and they use it.
And they're giving it to every single one of that company's competitors. So
right.
I keep seeing competitive product after competitive product after competitive product. So what am I going to do? I'm going to go turn off that interest.
Right.
And all those guys are going to lose out. They're not going to be able to get that. So that's kind of a long way of saying Reddit, in protecting that, in respecting people's attention and not, and putting up barriers to, selling that
right.
attention, could be a long-term good play. Because
I would agree.
Right. And in the same vein, Amazon's made a decision. They're getting into the advertising business. And
right.
They're taking more and more of our sales page
and putting it out to the sponsored products.
Yep. And the stuff, I did a screenshot of it. I can't remember what it was. Like, I was looking at somebody's book in the review section, and there was like an ad for some drug. And it was like all the, what do you call it? This, the side effects.
I'm sure.
Like it sounds like a bit like an irrelevant bad ad on this page, right? Like, so
So what's that subconscious effect, right? And how does that add up? And I'm sure it does. Who knows? Maybe someone had that drug and they're an avid reader of yours and they see that and they get ticked off and they don't buy the book, not even consciously, but they just see the ad and they walk away from their computer. And maybe they buy it later, maybe they don't. But I'm with you. I mean, having something like that, it's like getting a brand new car and taking a key right across the side of it.
Yeah, and I think that's where this stuff gets lost. You don't see the slippery slope you're on, and
agreed.
Hopefully, in something like Reddit, they continue to respect that.
I think they will. They're definitely in the ad space. It's coming up, but it seems more insulated than some other places.
Yeah. So, if let's say I was a new author and I thought that I wanted to get into trying this out as a way to get into the business, what would you give for like initial advice?
Here's what you got to do. This is a good question. This is a fantastic question because it's much easy. I would say it's easier to get started on Reddit as a new author than an established one. If you're established, you can maybe create your own subreddit as a place for people to go hang out, but it's not going to get you a lot of clout there usually, unless you're someone like Sanderson who pops up on Reddit every once in a while and everyone knows who he is. If you're just a middle class science bio author or something along those lines, you're not going to have their name recognition over there. Mm-hmm. But where it does come useful, so let's say you're new, you're popping in. Again, it's building that group. So the first thing I would say is don't let the dollars bother you. You're going to see stuff like Patreon everywhere. You're going to see people dropping their books online, trying to sell them. And, sometimes it works. But what really works is when you have a big group and then you give those options out. I mean, again, you're trying to build that community, to build that respect. You're giving stuff. I mean, I think everything I've ever written on Reddit, which is, I think, my entire catalog. Maybe there's one or two that aren't on there, but it's completely free on there. And you get those fans that come time and time again. So I'd recommend, if you're a new author, find a sub that has to do with writing. There's a couple of them on there, and you want to find when there's a lot of readers. You're not looking for somewhere with authors. You're looking for people that are going to love your books and they're going to read it. And find out what they enjoy and write to it. And usually there's subs that'll probably match with what you enjoy, and you can build your reader base there. Once you have that, write a couple books. Let's say 2, 3. I'm not sure what the perfect number is. And don't even publish them on Amazon. Just build up a bit of a backlog. And then once you get that and you get those big groups following you or enough of attraction, then you can start publishing and worrying about cash. But the point is that you really don't want to come and try to take. You're giving. You're bringing people to your community because you're offering them stuff. And I don't think I've had anyone that's come to my community mad that I'm selling my books because they can get it all for free. And not just that they can get it for free, even if they couldn't. I mean, there's 5 books for free on there at one point or another. I mean, that's a lot of content that you're giving out. It's like watching a trailer of a movie and it's actually the first 2 movies. So, I mean, there's a lot there. And when you give more than you take, that's important. So again, for Redditors, if you're going on there, trying to build it, first of all, find out if the writing life is for you. Write 2 books before you even publish anything. Then go, make sure you have your community when you're writing these books. If you're writing these books and 2 people are following it, if you want to make a career out of it, it's not going to work. You might have to ditch your beautiful book that you love because there's only 2 people following it. Find something that clicks with people, that they love, that iteratively over time you can build. And then you can look, once you have a big group, and give them that option that if they want to go above and beyond, if they want to contribute, they can.
So to give me a framework, like what would you consider like, okay, I might have something here as far as, a number, and wow, this is a big group, and kind of give me a framework of numbers. What's the spectrum?
It can go anywhere. I mean, it depends because there's different subs, right? So
let's start out with this. Your subreddit. How many folks are?
Around 10,000, and I haven't grown that in probably 2-3 years. So but that's something if you wanted to keep growing, you can. But I'm pretty happy with that number. If you want, let's say you want to grow, find that subreddit that matches your brand. So for instance, there's HFY, which is a science fiction subreddit. There's No Sleep, which is the horror one. There's Writing Prompts, which typically goes more superhero, more, fantasy, but there's all sorts of stuff on there that you can go off of. Once you're on there and you start posting, see if you track well in that subreddit. So what I would try to do is if you can get that first post on Reddit, it's like a Pareto effect. If you float all the way to the top of the feed, I mean, you get 10 times more responses there than number 3 on the feed or something along those lines.
Right,
So
right,
if
right.
so if you start getting to the point where predictably you can go up to those levels from your fan base and people really being into you, that's where I think you have the ability to say, okay, I've got something here, I can roll with it. It's going to take a while. I mean, it took me probably 2 years to get some of that clout together where people are really coming in over and over and people start realizing what your name is and they see there's a story by this guy, I want to read it because I see his user tag there. And I'd recommend brand a little bit. It's dumb, it's simple, but every one of my stories at the end says "by Leo." People start to realize who Leo is. It sticks with them a little more than just a username there.
Mm-hmm. No, that makes sense. And folks that think that you're going to somehow strong arm this stuff, it just doesn't work, especially in today's marketplace where you
can't.
There's 8 million titles on Amazon right now.
And you're competing with people on Reddit too. Amazon, Reddit, wherever you go, there's competition. Yeah. One thing I would remind people though is to remember it's somewhat of a stepping stone. Amazon's a big zone, I would say. If you come into Amazon, you're already a medium to a large fish, or however you want to phrase it. You're not the tiniest guy on the block. It's going to exponentially drive your chances up, in my opinion, of getting noticed. On Reddit, I would say once you get large enough, you don't want to take advantage of the system. So for me, I've edged away from it a little more. I still care for my fans over there. I still have my zone, my awesome fan base that I keep, but I'm not going over to the major subs and trying to pull new fans over and everything like that. I kind of reserve that for the new authors on the block, the people that are learning, because you don't want to abuse that either. If you get too large and people think you have some sort of monopoly or something like that, I've seen it before, bad things happen. I can't tell you necessarily what will, but the tower will fall. So just respect their community. But then once you have 10,000 fans on there, you can go ahead and use that to push your own product or whatever it is that you're looking to do.
Oh, that's great. I tell you, it really kind of blew my mind with that whole idea of it being a place to get your chops.
I think so.
Out,
but that's your booster now. Mm-hmm.
What was that?
That's your booster too. Whenever I publish on Amazon, I put a post up and probably get a couple hundred, I don't know how many sales, but I mean a chunk on that first day or whatever it is. It's like an additional mailing list that goes out and brings people up.
No, that's great. And like you said, you've had people there somehow, you don't know how got you into other places and backlinked or whatever, and it's resulted in big sales. And I mean, that's just that opportunity set that comes with the more that's part of the cumulative advantage thing I talk about in the book. Is like once you get to a certain size, you just get more opportunities.
They come way quicker. There's way difference between them. The time lag is slower, and it just starts happening naturally. When you're a brand new author, it is your day if someone tells their friend about a book that they enjoyed. The other day, someone went on and they published on one of my reviews. They just put a paperback copy and said, "I love this. I told all my friends." Well, I looked at the day that they told all their friends. I never sell hardly any paperbacks. And that single day, it was the largest paperback spike I've ever had in my history as like an author. And it wasn't a ton, but still, you see that interaction through those little cues. How many of those exist that you never picked up on? Probably hundreds. And as you build those bigger, you're just rolling the dice. And eventually it'll line up, the stars align, and you have those awesome big opportunities.
No, that's awesome. Well, Leo, it's been awesome having you on. You got any new books coming out? What's kind of the latest with the actual story world?
I do. So I'm working on wrapping up my superhero series now. And then after that, I have a series coming out. I wouldn't call it lit RPG. I wouldn't even struggle to call it game lit necessarily. More of like an advancement fantasy type book. I'm really not a game lit writer, but it has some of those elements. So I'm dabbling in that area. But I would classify it more towards the epic fantasy. And that's going to come out in, I think, 3-4 weeks or sometime in December. And that one is coming out called Heavenfall. So I'm excited for that. First of a series.
Cool. And, well, it's been great having you on. And I really appreciate you taking the time to share this interesting space. It's crazy to think that there's 10,000 people out there that are clamoring to wait for a chapter.
It's wild. And hey, there might only be, you never know, maybe it's only 500 of them that are coming back regularly or 100. But still, it's like that mailing list. You have your super fans within the super fans. You got to build it up. Thanks so much, Joe, for having me. I appreciate it.
All right. Thanks a lot, man.